Winter pressed hard over Hazel Ridge, Pennsylvania, on that silent Wednesday morning in January 1981, when two state troopers turned down an old dirt road that led into the woods. The road, washed out every spring and ignored by most of the county for years, ended at a lonely two-story farmhouse the locals had whispered about for decades. The house hadn't been opened in 43 years. The windows were boarded from the inside. The chimney hadn't given a breath of smoke in a generation. No one had seen the Marsh sisters since 1938. Most believed they were long gone, but a utility worker updating grid maps had noticed the impossible. The house was still drawing electricity, barely a trace but steady. And someone or something had been paying the bills automatically since 1937. Sheriff Richard Holloway sent two of his best men, Daniel Kovac and James Brennan, to investigate. Neither man could have imagined how that decision would twist the rest of their lives. When the troopers stepped out of the car, the first thing they felt wasn't cold. It was silence. A thick, unnatural stillness that settled over the property like the air itself was waiting for something. The house stood under a sky the color of steel, its white paint long surrendered to rot and rain. The front door was nailed shut from the inside, dozens of nails hammered in with desperate strength. Every window was covered, every crack sealed. The back door was the same. The cellar had been filled with concrete. It made no sense. Yet the electric meter turned softly, like a heartbeat barely holding on. After calling out for nearly 20 minutes and hearing nothing but their own breath, Kovac and Brennan forced the door. It took both of them, sweating in the freezing air, 15 minutes to pry it loose. The moment the wood gave way, a heavy breath of stale, dark air pushed out. Not rot, not death, something older. Something that smelled of earth, time, and secrets. Their flashlights cut through dust that drifted like fog. The narrow hallway sagged under peeling wallpaper. Rooms waited on each side, frozen in abandonment. But ahead, in the kitchen, a single light glowed, and beneath that bare bulb sat two elderly women. They did not gasp. They did not rise. Their hands were folded neatly on the table. They stared straight ahead, as though expecting someone else. They wore long dresses from another century, hair pulled back tight, their faces pale and still. But their eyes were awake, sharp, knowing, too knowing. Kovac asked if they were Dorothy and Evelyn Marsh. Slowly, Dorothy turned her head and looked at him with a smile that wasn't relief, wasn't fear. It was a smile that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Evelyn remained motionless, lips pressed tightly together. The official report from that day was 3 pages long. It described the condition of the house, the two sisters, and their removal for medical evaluation. What it did not include was the conversation that followed. Because that conversation, the one recorded, transcribed, and sealed away forever, stretched for 11 pages. And what those pages described changed everything the officers understood about fear. When asked how long they'd been inside, Dorothy answered calmly, since December of 1938. 43 years, 1 month, and 9 days. Brennan stared at her. Why would anyone wall themselves inside a house for decades? Evelyn finally lifted her head. Her voice was soft, steady, and unbearably certain. We made a promise to our father. Kovac, trying to keep his voice level, asked what kind of promise could trap 2 women for almost half a century, cut off from every human being alive. Dorothy and Evelyn exchanged a long, silent look. A look that seemed to hold an entire unspoken world inside it. Then Dorothy said the words that made Kovac step back without even realizing it. We promised to keep it contained. Brennan frowned. Keep what contained? Dorothy answered with a single phrase that made no sense. Not then. Not ever. The pattern. And as the troopers stood in that dim kitchen, surrounded by dust and silence and 2 women who had locked themselves away from the world, something shifted in the air. Something unseen. Something waiting. Something that had been held back for 43 years. The kitchen felt colder as the sisters began to speak, as if the house itself were listening. Evelyn's hands stayed folded neatly on the table, her posture rigid, her breath slow and measured. Dorothy watched the officers with calm, unwavering eyes that suggested none of this was new to her. She had been waiting for this moment. When Brennan asked what the pattern meant, Dorothy reached into the pocket of her faded dress and pulled out a small leather journal. Its edges were worn, its pages swollen from age, yet she placed it on the table with a kind of reverence. "Everything is in here," she said softly. "Every death, every generation, every cycle. Back to 1762. Kovac lifted the journal, feeling the weight of it. More than paper, more than history. Dorothy continued, her voice steady, as if she'd told the story 1,000 times in the dark hours of the night. "Our father found the pattern in 1936. He was a mathematics professor at Hazel Ridge College. Before it closed, he called it generational recursion." Her eyes drifted towards some distant memory. He believed that certain outcomes repeated themselves through family lines. Not through blood the way science understands it. Through something else, something that moved alongside us. Brennan frowned, trying to keep the conversation grounded. "You mean genetics? Illness?" Dorothy shook her head slowly. "No, this wasn't biological." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her voice nearly a whisper. "It is older than illness." The silence between their words pressed heavily on the room. Even the dust seemed to hang motionless. Dorothy opened the journal with careful fingers. On its pages were names, rows of them, written in precise handwriting: birth dates, death dates, locations, notes, patterns repeating with cold, unbroken certainty. "Every third generation," she said. "Every youngest daughter. Dead at 33, she tapped the list. 1762, 1795, Waffen 1894, 1927. 6 cycles, 6 youngest daughters, all dying on December 16th, no exceptions. Brennan shifted uncomfortably, but he forced himself to stay professional. "Coincidence?" he offered gently. "Tragedy, maybe. But coincidence? No," Dorothy said. "Because it happened again." Kovac looked up sharply. "In 1960, Dorothy nodded. "My younger cousin Margaret, December 16th. She was 33. Found in her apartment. No signs of illness, violence, or poisoning. She just stopped." Brennan swallowed. "Then why are you still alive?" He looked at Evelyn. "If you were the youngest daughter, why weren't you the one in 1960? Evelyn's eyes lifted slowly to meet his. For the first time, her voice wavered with the tremor of something deeply buried. "I should have died," she said. "I was the youngest, but the pattern doesn't care about age unless the cycle arrives. I was born in 1909. By 1960, I would have been 51. The pattern doesn't follow birthdays. It follows bloodlines," Dorothy added quietly. "Our father believed that if the youngest daughter removed herself completely from the world, if she ceased to exist publicly, socially, legally, the pattern could not find her. It needs a place, it needs a witness, it needs the person to be part of the world." Kovac stared at them, confused. "What does that mean?" Dorothy folded her hands again. "It means we had to disappear. They had sealed themselves in the house in December 1938. No contact, no visitor letters, no outside life. They paid their bills automatically, stockpiled food, rationed every candle. They vanished from the world long before anyone realized. They waited 22 years for Evelyn's death day to pass. But as the officers listened, expecting relief to follow, Dorothy's expression darkened. "We should have been safe after 1960, she said. "We should have unsealed the doors, but we didn't." "Why not?" Brennan asked quietly. Dorothy's answer chilled the room. "Because we heard it knocking." The words fell like ice into the air around them. She continued, her voice dropping lower. 3 months after December 16th, 1960. 5 knocks, always 5. Always 10 seconds apart. Always between 2 and 4 in the morning. Evelyn's voice followed, almost inaudible. "It came every year. On the same night, December 16th, and every year it became louder." Dorothy's fingers trembled against the journal. "Last year it wasn't just at the door. It was the windows, all of them, circling the house, testing every sealed point, every barrier. For a moment, the kitchen felt smaller, tighter, as if the shadows along the walls shifted closer." Brennan swallowed hard. "What was it?" Dorothy looked at him with eyes too calm, too old, too certain. "We don't know what it is," she said. "We only know it belongs to us. And it is patient." The officers exchanged a glance. one of fear, one of dawning dread, because nothing in their training prepared them for what the sisters had just described. Nothing human knocked like that. Nothing waited decades. Nothing hunted a bloodline. And yet the women spoke with such clarity, such certainty, that something inside Kovac's chest tightened with a quiet, unspoken truth. They believed it, every word. The more the sisters spoke, the more the house itself seemed to contract around the four of them, as if the walls had kept more than two women prisoner for 43 years. Kovac and Brennan listened, torn between disbelief and the unsettling feeling that everything they were hearing was somehow, impossibly, true. Dorothy gently closed the leather journal, as if sealing something dangerous inside it. The officers waited, the kitchen bulb humming faintly above them, the light flickering in a way that made the sisters' faces appear older, thinner, stretched by decades of fear. But their fear wasn't wild or panicked. It was organized. It had shape, it had rules. That was the part that unnerved Brennan most. Madness didn't behave with this kind of discipline. Kovac finally found his voice. If the cycle ended in 1960, if Evelyn survived, then why did you stay? Why didn't you unseal the house after that? The answer came with no hesitation. Because it wasn't over, Dorothy said. Passing the age doesn't break it. It only moves it forward. And once it realized we had hidden ourselves away, it changed. Brennan frowned. Changed how? Dorothy's jaw tightened. It learned. Those words lingered, heavy as frost. Evelyn looked down at her hands, her fingers knotted together like brittle branches. We thought it needed age, she whispered. We thought it followed rules that were fixed. We thought it could be avoided. But the year after Margaret died, the first year the cycle should have ended, we heard it. Her voice trembled for the first time. At the door, 5 knocks, slow, deliberate. Brennan asked, though he already sensed the answer. Dorothy shook her head. Every year, every December 16th, the night it claimed the others, and always between 2 and 4 in the morning. Evelyn added softly, always 5 knocks, always 10 seconds apart, as though it were counting with patience, as though time meant nothing to it. Kovac felt a tightening in his stomach. And it kept coming. For 20 years. Dorothy nodded. And last year it became something else. Her voice lowered, as if speaking too loudly might summon whatever memory still clung to the walls. In 1980, just 1 month before you found us, it knocked on every window, all at once, as if it were circling the house, testing the seal, searching for a weakness. Evelyn's eyes shone with the reflection of the bare bulb, and for a moment she looked much younger, like a child remembering a nightmare she never woke from. It doesn't give up, she whispered. It never gives up. Brennan exhaled, trying to steady himself. What does it want? The next youngest daughter, Dorothy said. Always the next, always the bloodline. She touched the journal again, her fingertips tracing the worn cover. That's why we stayed. The cycle might have passed us, but it did not forget us. It only waited. Brennan's jaw tightened. Waited for what? Dorothy looked directly at him. For the world to open the door. Her gaze held his for a moment too long, long enough to make him feel suddenly complicit in something he didn't yet understand. A shiver crawled up his spine. Kovac swallowed, trying to regain control of the moment. We're taking you out of here. You can't stay sealed inside this place any longer. Dorothy's face shifted for the first time, a flicker of sharp, genuine fear crossing it. No, she said quickly. You must not break the seal. The moment you do, it'll be fine. Brennan interrupted gently. You're safe now. Dorothy stared at him with a look that didn't resemble gratitude. It resembled a warning. You think we're afraid for ourselves, she said, but we stayed for everyone else. We held it here. We were protecting you. The officers exchanged a glance. They'd heard the same words from countless confused, troubled people. But nothing about these 2 women felt confused. Nothing felt fractured. Every word was deliberate, and yet protocol demanded they remove them. Their condition demanded evaluation. Their isolation demanded intervention. They didn't know they were undoing 40, 3 years of containment. Later, Brennan would remember the moment the sisters were led outside. Dorothy's final look over her shoulder at the darkened house. Evelyn's trembling steps as sunlight touched her skin for the first time since Roosevelt was president. Both women crossing the threshold like prisoners being pushed into danger, not pulled out of it. Dorothy's parting words, spoken directly into Kovac's ear before she was lifted into the ambulance, never made it into the official report. But he wrote them in his private notes and never forgot them. You've let it out now, and it knows there is another generation. Her voice was thin, but the certainty inside it was iron. It will find them faster than it found us. The doors of the ambulance closed. The engine started. The sisters were driven away. And behind them, the Marsh house stood silent again, but not empty. Something else was finally free. The Marsh sisters left Hazel Ridge on a cold January afternoon, escorted into an ambulance they did not want to enter. Dorothy's final words, "You've let it out now," lingered in Kovac's mind long after the rear doors closed. Something in her voice made him feel that he had broken more than a wooden seal that day. He had broken a boundary the world wasn't meant to cross. The sisters spent 6 days in Hazel Ridge General Hospital. Doctors described them as physically frail but astonishingly lucid. They spoke clearly. They remembered dates with perfect precision. They told the same story every time without contradiction. No hallucinations, no delusions, no shared psychosis. Evelyn wept only once, when someone opened the hospital window to let in fresh air. She begged them not to. She said the air carried sound. On January 20th, 1981, Dorothy and Evelyn were placed into the care of their nephew, Thomas Marsh. They left Pennsylvania forever that night. The county boarded up the farmhouse and scheduled it for demolition. The journal, the interviews, the second sealed report. Everything was locked under court order. A judge read the documents, shut the folder firmly, and whispered, "No one else reads this." 2 months later, Dorothy was dead. Natural causes. A year after that, Kovac quit the force, haunted by the memory of a smile that wasn't human. Brennan, once unshakable, began praying in silence every morning before sunrise. None of them understood what exactly had been released, but all three felt its absence, like a pressure gone from the air. Evelyn lived quietly in a Cleveland care home until 1991. She left one instruction: do not bury her. Scatter her ashes in a flowing river. Let nothing rooted hold her name. Thomas honored her request, though he never asked why. He inherited the research, faded papers, dusty diagrams, generations of names. He read it once, then burned everything, believing fire would end the curse. But fire could not burn blood. The pattern's next cycle was 1993. Thomas had 2 daughters, Sarah and Rebecca. Rebecca, the younger, was only 22. Too young to be the target, too early for the cycle, too far outside the rules. But rules were no longer rules. On December 16, 1993, at 2:47 in the morning, Rebecca's roommate woke to the sound of footsteps in the kitchen. She found Rebecca standing still in the dark, staring at the front door as though something pressed its forehead against the other side. "Rebecca," she whispered. Rebecca's head turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes blank and unfocused. When she spoke, her voice sounded layered, like someone else was speaking just behind her. "Someone's knocking. Don't you hear it?" There was no knock. Not for the roommate. But Rebecca heard it. Heard it every night after that. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped responding. Even when doctors tried medication, her eyes remained fixed on walls, doors, windows, anything that could admit something from the outside. 6 weeks later, on January 28, 1994, her heart simply gave up. She was 23, too young, too early. But the pattern had changed. It no longer cared about age. It only cared about the bloodline. Rebecca spoke one final time before she died. A nurse wrote it down without understandings. "It found me anyway. You can't hide from your blood." The Marsh line ended with her. Years passed. The Hazel Ridge house was demolished in 2003, though no one would build on the land afterward. Contractors claimed trouble with soil permits, unseen boundaries, excuses that made no sense to the county. Something hung in the air there. something left over. Every Freedom of Information request for the sealed report has been denied, even though no Marsh family member survives. The official reason remains privacy. But privacy for whom? Before Brennan died in 2011, his daughter asked him why he still refused to talk about the Marsh sisters. He remained silent a long time. Then he finally told her something he had never told anyone. Not Kovac, not the department, not even his wife. A year after they removed the sisters, Brennan drove to the property alone. The house still stood, boarded, silent, untouched. He didn't enter. He just stood in the yard as night fell, and when the last light slipped behind the trees, he heard it. 5 knocks slow, even, 10 seconds apart, coming from inside a house no living person had set foot in for a year. He didn't wait for a second round. He ran back to his car and never returned. When his daughter asked if he believed the sisters' story, truly believed it, he stared at the floor, his voice brittle. "I don't know what was in that house with them," he said softly. "But I know it wasn't human, and I know it's still looking." And so the story remains, sealed in a forgotten courthouse drawer, whispered in the spaces between generations. The pattern has no house now, no walls to contain it, no sisters to hold it back. It follows blood, it follows silence, it follows the next open door, and somewhere, sometime, it will knock again.